Imagine there's a kid in 9th grade. His English teacher gives his class the prompt, how would you write the next Star Wars movie? She gives the class 12 minutes. The kid writes his heart out about what he would do with the characters. He wasn't really a fan of the last film, so he spends 6 minutes of his time working as hard as he can to undo everything that was previously established. He figures because this is an English class, and just some stupid assignment, he can do whatever he wants. So he spends his remaining time just writing whatever nonsensical garbage comes into his head. That child's writing went on to become... I'm not exaggerating when I say that the script for The Rise of Skywalker feels like a Reddit fanfiction. I was floored at what I was seeing. It's not as though the film started strong and got worse. The opening title crawl genuinely felt like something out of a YouTube parody. It started off bad and ended bad, and I'm determined to figure out why. It's clear now that, at the outset, Disney had no idea what they were going to do with this franchise. The best metaphor I have for the trilogy is Luke's lightsaber. In The Force Awakens, Luke's lightsaber is just as it was in the original series, but a bit more polished. It's something we already know, yeah, but it's presented in such a nice way that we don't mind that much. In The Last Jedi, Luke's lightsaber becomes fractured in two, taking a new direction with things we haven't seen so far. It's smart and subversive, but there are still plenty of flaws to be found, but the fans didn't like that. So in The Rise of Skywalker, the lightsaber is back in one piece with zero explanation, and then buried deep into the center of the planet along with any sense of logic or reason. It's no real wonder why this movie failed. The Rise of Skywalker was put into the hands of some of the worst filmmakers in the industry today. Chris Terrio wrote hits such as Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, and Justice League. Do I even need to say more? They got the man who wrote Batman v Superman to land their multi-billion-dollar franchise trilogy. But he wasn't alone. Having already written two soulless, nonsensical cash grabs, Derek Connolly and Colin Trevorrow were also tapped to help co-write. The cinematography wasn't particularly bad, but there wasn't really anything special about it either. And that's not something that's surprising when you get Dan Mindel, who shot Star Trek Into Darkness and Venom. What I can say about it is that no shots last for more than 10 seconds. There is no time to settle in or become accustomed to a new place because there is a cut every 2 seconds. This also isn't helped by the garbage editing. This is the 17th film Marion Brandon has edited, with some notable mentions being Star Trek Into Darkness, The Darkest Minds, and Venom. The whole thing feels so rushed and fast-paced, but it never feels like anything important is happening on screen. It seriously feels like nobody tried with this one.
What was your reaction to the end of the movie? But don't use words, okay? I'm going to count you in, do it all at the same time. 3, 2, 1.
After 40 years, this is it.
It's the last one, so why would anybody need to try? People are just going to show up anyways. It's just soulless, pathetic noise for 2.5 hours. It's a boneless party pleaser. Speaking of not trying, I cannot remember a single track of the original score here. Both The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi have actually good original scores. Sure, a lot of it is rehashed music, but there are some actual bangers in there. But that's not really the case here. I'm seriously racking my brains for a single new note of music and I cannot find any. John Williams just delivered his usual hour and 17 minutes of default Star Wars music and that was it. Nobody was trying here.
Or how does it make you feel, or what would you say to people who don't like what happens, or wish it was something different? Is there a problem with the fandom that...
No, I'd say that they're right.
Here's where I'm going to get into spoilers, so skip to this point in the video if that's something you care about. Okay, let's get into it. Right off the bat, we are treated to an opening title crawl that is nothing short of embarrassing. Apparently, Emperor Palpatine has been alive the entire trilogy and was directing things behind the scenes. The best explanation we get to Palpatine being alive is Darth Sith magic. That's seriously it. It becomes a running theme with this movie that death isn't something to be taken seriously. There are so many inconsequential death fake-outs that are predictable and lazy. Apparently people that use the Force have the power to just heal anybody that is hurt, meaning there should not be a single problem with people dying the rest of the movie. This fact immediately takes away any possible tension that could occur in the movie. After learning about Palpatine off-screen, Kylo Ren decides he wants to find the Emperor and kill him so there will be no threat to his power. Upon arriving at Palpatine's headquarters, he is treated to a vast exposition dump trying to reconcile the events of the previous two movies. Apparently, the Emperor made Snoke in order to have a more approachable form in which to manipulate and guide Kylo Ren. Now is also a good time to mention that the Emperor looks exactly like the Nun, so he might have been right to a certain degree. The Emperor makes a deal with Kylo, turning his army over to him. Then, out of nowhere, the Emperor pulls 10,000 Star Destroyers out of the ocean and gives them to Kylo. It seriously looks like the animators took one model of a Star Destroyer and copied and pasted it 1,000 times over. At this information, you may have a few burning questions. Where did these ships come from? How were they just sitting at the bottom of the ocean all this time? Who was piloting these ships? If the Emperor literally has 10,000 Star Destroyers, then what the hell does he need Kylo Ren for? That last question becomes even stranger when, later in the film, it is revealed that every single one of the Star Destroyers has Death Star technology on them. The Emperor pulled 10,000 star-destroying spaceships out of thin air, and for some reason he still needs this child. If you just send one of these ships to all of the major planets in the galaxy, you would have effectively conquered the entire galaxy in under 15 minutes. Moving on with the story, we find Rey trying to talk to her ancestors through the Force. She fails and then talks to a cardboard cutout of Carrie Fisher. And let me tell you, what they did with General Leia in this film is abysmal. Essentially, J.J. Abrams took one deleted scene from The Force Awakens that had Princess Leia in it, cut her out of that scene, and then pasted her randomly around the entire movie, and tried to make her lines work Mad Lib style. No matter where Leia is in the film, she is always shot from the exact same camera angles in the exact same outfit with the same lighting. And before anybody comments and says at least they didn't CGI her like they said they were going to do, that is absolutely something they end up doing later in the film, and she looks like a PS1 character. You already successfully CGI'd Carrie Fisher once, and that was in broad daylight, so how do you manage to mess it up ever so much in a scene that takes place completely in the dark that lasts for 20 frames? I'm only about 4 minutes into the movie at this point, so I'm just gonna jump ahead a little. The Resistance discovers Palpatine is still alive, so our main characters hop over to a desert planet in hopes of finding a MacGuffin that will take them to him. There we meet up with Lando Calrissian, and we get yet another wonderful exposition dump that I am still attempting to wrap my head around. Apparently Luke Skywalker knew about Palpatine in his return and was hunting him the entire time. This is something that Luke knew and never told anyone about. For a moment I want to backtrack and talk about the Knights of Ren. The Knights of Ren were briefly mentioned in a flashback in The Force Awakens and haven't been seen as a real part of the story up until this point in the trilogy. Here they accompany Kylo for a few scenes and then die at the end. Cool. Back on the desert planet, the Resistance crew stumbles upon a ship that Rey finds familiar. On the ship, they discover a Sith dagger that contains untranslatable Sith text that will lead to a Sith wayfinder that will lead to Palpatine, because we need to stretch out this plot even further for some reason. We are then treated to choppily edited flashback footage of Rey's parents leaving in the same ship, and upon seeing this, I became incredibly wary. As somebody who actually liked what they did with Rey's parents turning out to be nobodies, I was fearful that J.J. Abrams might put a stupid secondary twist, and sadly my fears were confirmed, but we'll get into that in a minute. So the First Order discovers the Resistance is on the desert planet and comes looking for them. Rey senses Kylo approaching and wanders off from the ready-to-leave ship. At about the same time, Chewbacca wanders off for no reason and gets himself caught by stormtroopers. Rey and Kylo then play tug-of-war over the ship that Chewie is in. Rey accidentally blasts the ship with lightning and it explodes. Chewbacca is dead until the next scene where he isn't. At least our heroes think he's dead, until the next scene where Rey just senses he's alive. What an unnecessary turn of events. And their explanation for him being alive is that he just happened to be in a different transport ship that we didn't see and wasn't previously established. This is the epitome of lazy writing and I hate it. At a certain point you realize that this movie doesn't really have a structure. I mean, it has the normal Disney 3-act structure of establish where everyone is, do side quests for the middle chunk, and then have a big climactic battle at the end. But it lacks an A and B plot that usually denotes a Star Wars film. The A plot is clearly our heroes, but there isn't a clear B story. The movie just cuts between the Resistance base, Kylo Ren, and other shenanigans seemingly randomly. Now it's time to talk about the most overused and unfunny character in the whole movie, C-3PO. 3PO is in most of the scenes in the movie and is unbearable to watch. His style of comedy is just being annoying, and then having other characters reminding him that he is annoying. C-3PO is integral to the story because of the MacGuffin. No, not that MacGuffin, the other MacGuffin. Essentially, the writing on the dagger is in a language that none of our heroes speak, but C-3PO is able to translate it, but he is not allowed to tell them what it says because, and I quote, a law passed in Congress. If he could directly translate it, it would save us from more pointless side quests, but we need to manufacture conflict somehow. The film tries to have a dramatic moment in which C-3PO's memory is erased so he will be able to translate the text. But 2 scenes later, he gets his memory back from R2-D2. What a waste of time. Speaking of wasted time, Poe and Finn have nothing to do in this movie. They are side characters with no arcs. Finn returns back to his Force Awakens character of chasing after Rey, and shouting Rey a lot, and having Rey ignore him, and that's something that's never resolved. A brief line is thrown in towards the end that suggests that Finn can use the Force, because why not? I don't really have an objection that he can use the Force, but the fact that it's so underused and just barely slipped in there for fan service is quite annoying. Rey and Kylo have a conversation through the Force, and this is basically the only part of The Last Jedi that was carried over, so I can't really give this movie too much credit for me liking it. It's at this point that Kylo decides to tell Rey who her parents are, and you guessed it, they're completely undoing what they did in the previous movie. Thanks, J.J. Abrams. As it turns out, Rey is actually Emperor Palpatine's granddaughter. This entire movie feels like it was taken from a bad Reddit post, or a random word generator. This in no way feels like a creative decision that comes from somebody who actually wanted to tell a story. This feels like J.J. Abrams wanting to be as crowd-pleasing as possible, and retcon the previous movie to his liking. Eventually, the crew wind up on Endor and the wreckage of the second Death Star, because apparently that's where the Sith Wayfinder is. Rey steals a ship and sails to the wreckage of the Death Star without telling anyone. She seriously has a problem with communication that is never acknowledged or resolved, despite how many times she throws the entire crew under the bus. It's here where that shot of Rey with a red lightsaber from the trailer appears. And I was right in my assumption that this wouldn't be significant at all. They fight for 20 seconds and that's it. On the wreckage, Rey and Kylo fight, and Kylo easily overpowers Rey. Sensing this, Leia decides to lay down in a bed and die so Kylo will sense it and be thrown off for a second. He does so, giving Rey an opportunity to stab him through the chest with her lightsaber. What could be an impactful moment in the story is negated by the fact that nobody can die anymore. Rey decides to heal him and then takes his ship to go into exile like Luke did. Ghost Luke gives some exposition and tells Rey how Leia was also training to be a Jedi, and he gives her his lightsaber for the final battle. Still on the wreckage of the Death Star, Kylo Ren has a conversation with Han Solo. Not like Force Ghost Han Solo just appears as a memory and talks to him. The whole time, I couldn't help but think of the other movie that Chris Terrio wrote that contained a scene that was almost exactly like this. Kylo Ren decides he doesn't want to be a bad guy anymore and throws his lightsaber away. Some stuff happens and now we're at the third act. The Resistance brings their dozen ships to take on the 10,000 Star Destroyers. How they all aren't obliterated by Star Destroyers that have planet-killing technology is beyond me. Rey goes off to confront Palpatine. She is going to kill him at first, but then Palpatine says he wants her to kill him because by killing him, his spirit will go into her body and he will basically become Rey. Hearing this, Rey doesn't want to kill him anymore, but he manages to convince her by saying he'll let her friends live. If she was going to kill you anyway, why would you make this unnecessarily complicated? Eventually, Kylo Ren shows up and Rey refuses to kill Palpatine. Palpatine just decides to steal their life force anyway and shoot all of the Resistance ships with lightning. Rey hears the voices of past Jedi and gets the strength to stand up. This feels like it should be the completion of a character arc, as it is what her character was seeking out to do at the beginning of the movie, but she didn't do anything to earn it. Palpatine turns his lightning on her, overpowering her, but Rey pulls out a second lightsaber and suddenly becomes more powerful than him. Palpatine is defeated and Rey collapses from the effort, seemingly dead. But again, death doesn't mean anything in this universe and Kylo Ren comes and revives her. They kiss, and at this point in my theater there were audible groans. The drunk guy sitting behind me yelled lazy writing and nobody objected. This entire confrontation worked so much better in Return of the Jedi, where there was actual emotional consequences to what was happening. There were character setups and payoffs with arcs that lasted multiple movies, and it worked great. Here it just feels like nothing. Kylo Ren fades away, having given Rey his life force, and Rey leaves. The Star Destroyers all fall out of the sky, and the day is saved. All across the galaxy, there are reports that the First Order is being defeated. Above Endor, we see that a Star Destroyer was annihilated using the same move that Holdo used in The Last Jedi. Even though there's a throwaway line in the movie that states that that move was a 1 in a million shot, it never explains why they couldn't have just done this from the start. It seems like a simple way to take out Star Destroyers, which were a looming threat the entire movie. The movie ends with Rey returning to Luke's farm and burying the two lightsabers. All Rey wanted in the previous two movies was to find a family, which she did, which makes it all the more infuriating when her character arc is ended with her returning to isolation on yet another desert planet. She also has a yellow lightsaber because toys. She is asked by a passerby what her last name is, and she responds Skywalker, and then the movie ends. I'm still racking my brains to see if I got anything out of this movie, and I don't think I did. There was no narrative payoff. I wasn't invested in any of the characters, unlike the previous two movies. Sure, there were a few cool things in it, but for every cool thing, there was 20 stupid things along the way. So by that math, in terms of how cool this movie was, I would give it a 0.5 out of 10. I went in with no expectations, and I was still disappointed. I wouldn't recommend this movie at all, although I know it being bad isn't enough to stop people from seeing it. If you want to watch a good film this Christmas, I'd recommend Uncut Gems or Portrait of a Lady on Fire when it comes out in January. I cannot overstate how much of a grueling and taxing experience watching this movie is. I don't ever plan on watching this movie again, and I'm giving it a 2 out of 10.